Third graders, we are continuing on with Magic Treehouse number 21, Civil War on Sunday. We are starting Chapter 5, Angel of the Battlefield. Jack still didn't remember who Clara Barton was. He pulled out the Civil War book and read. Clara Barton was a famous Civil War nurse. When she began nursing, she used her own money for her supplies. She drove a horse-drawn ambulance right onto the battlefield to help save wounded soldiers. For this reason, she became known as the Angel of the Battlefield. Jack put the book away, and then he hurried to Annie. He looked at the woman sitting in the driver's seat of the wagon. She didn't look like an angel, Jack thought. The woman was very small. She had a plain, serious face and dark hair pulled back in a bun. She wore a long black skirt and a black jacket. In the back of her wagon were more wounded soldiers in torn, bloody uniforms. They moaned and cried out. Nurses, both men and women, were putting the wounded men on stretchers. Clara Barton wiped her forehead. She looked hot and tired. "Can we help you, Miss Barton?" Annie asked. "Who are you?" said Clara Barton. "Jack and Annie," said Annie. "We're volunteer nurses. What can we do, Miss Barton?" Clara Barton smiled. "First, you can call me Clara," she said. "Second, would you ride with me back toward the battlefield? There are more wounded waiting to be picked up." "Sure," said Annie. Jack didn't answer. After seeing all the suffering men in the wagon, he was afraid of getting closer to the battlefield. "And you?" Clara asked Jack. Her dark, serious eyes looked right into his. Jack didn't want to admit that he was afraid. "Sure, no problem," he said. "Very good," said Clara Barton. "Let's go." Jack and Annie climbed up into the driver's seat next to her. By now all the soldiers had been taken out of the wagon. "Take care of my new family members," Clara called to the nurses. She slapped the reins. The horse-drawn ambulance rolled off, sending up clouds of dust. Chapter 6. Keep low! The wagon jerked and swayed as it bumped over the dry ground. Jack felt as though he were frying in the hot sunlight. Dust from the road filled his throat and his eyes. The boom of cannons grew louder and louder. Jack heard popping sounds too, like the noise of firecrackers. "What's that popping noise?" he shouted, blinded by the dust and the sunlight. "Musket fire!" said Clara. Jack remembered that muskets were long, old-fashioned guns. "What are those flashes?" asked Annie. Jack tried to open his eyes and see what she was talking about. He saw bright flashes of light in the distance and puffs of smoke in the sky. "Cannon shells! Exploding!" said Clara Barton. "Shells are like small bombs. They have ruined much of the farmland." Jack squinted at the passing countryside. The ground was filled with ugly holes. Long ditches were also cut through the fields. "Did the shells make those ditches too?" he asked. "No, those are trenches that the soldiers dug for battle," Clara said. "Each side digs their own. Day after day, they sit in the trenches, firing their muskets at one another." Jack tried to imagine how terrible it would be to sit in a trench all day, waiting to be shot, or waiting to shoot someone else. "We have to get some water," said Clara, and she drove the wagon to a narrow creek. A stream of water flowed downhill, running over rocks. The wagon came to a halt. Jack heard a whistling sound, then another. "Keep low!" said Clara. "What's that?" Jack asked. "Cannon fire," she said. Jack and Annie crouched down in the driver's seat. Jack felt a rush of panic. He pulled out their list. His hands were shaking as he read, "Be brave." Oh, great, he thought. Another cannon shell whizzed right overhead, and then another. The ground exploded. over and over in flashes of light. Dirt clods flew everywhere. Clouds of smoke and more dust filled the air. The horses neighed and whinnied. Be brave, Jack thought. Be brave. And that is where we'll leave off until tomorrow. Tomorrow we will read chapter 7, Helping Hands.